Hello everyone. In this short video, I'm going to introduce three major concepts: volunteer, nonprofit, and philanthropy. So what is volunteer or what is volunteering? There are three critical components we use to judge whether or not a behavior or an action belongs to volunteer behavior. So the first component is at least you need to provide some kind of service, right? For instance, you look after your neighbor's dogs or cats, right? So that's type of a service, and without any expectation of compensation. So which means no financial returns for your action, or at least you are not expecting that. And the third one is without any coercion or intimidation. Right, so which means you are act on your own free will. You are not being forced to do that, right? Nobody is pointing a gun at your head and force you to do that. So then some difference between coercion and mandated service. When we say mandated, it's not coerced. So there's a huge gap between these two, right? So you can be mandated, for instance, during COVID-19 pandemic, many schools require their students to wear a mask, right? You can call this the mandate, but you also have an option, right? You can say, okay, you are going to just stay at home, homeschooling, or you can pick a school that doesn't require wearing a mask, right? So you still got a choice, even though this is mandated by one place, but you can choose another place that doesn't require that, right? While we mean coerce, or we mean intimidated, which means somebody are going to hurt you or use violence against you if you didn't do as they commanded. So that's the difference. All right. So then there are also three types of volunteering behavior. Generally, we agree there are three broad types. Formal volunteering, which means unpaid work outside the home or through a non-profit organization usually. And the informal unpaid work, right? But not through a nonprofit, a formal organization, right? You pick up a trash can and throw it in the trash bin, so on the sidewalk, etc. And the housework is somehow controversial, right? If someone's philosophical starting point is view like quite individualism, right? Quite libertarianism, maybe view family members as others, right? So then you are providing service like washing dishes for others. So that will be considered as a volunteer behavior if this is your starting point. However, if you view the whole family as a private sector, right, a private entity, then you are not providing service to others, right? You are providing service within a private entity. It's considered your own family. So if that's your starting point, then housework may not be considered as a volunteer behavior, right? It really depends on your starting point. So then what is philanthropy, right? Why ordinary people make extraordinary donations? Now here I would like to introduce my colleague Michael Moody and his mentor's definition about philanthropy. So philanthropy is voluntary action for the public good, right? So we already explained what do we mean by volunteer or volunteer behavior. Now for philanthropy is voluntary giving, voluntary services, and voluntary association, right? And then what do we mean by the Nonprofits Act, now especially the Nonprofits Act in the United States? There are three common features of nonprofits. The first is they need to be voluntary associated or voluntary participation, right? People work for nonprofit organizations. They will not be coerced to participate. And then the second thing is nonprofits, they don't distribute their profits to personal pockets. That's called the non-distribution of profits constraints, right? So this is regulated by the IRS because if nonprofit organizations, they want to enjoy their tax exempt status for their 501c3 organizational status, then they can't distribute profits to stakeholders. And the last feature is social ownership, which means it's very hard for you to actually figure out who owns a nonprofit organization. Right? So because the social ownership exists, the nonprofit organizations, they exist without simple and clean lines of ownership and accountability. All right, but they are bounded by the non-distribution of profits, and they usually work for a very noble cause. So why are we care, right? Why should we care about volunteer, nonprofit, and philanthropy? What kind of things should we talk about? Now, we understand the skills and practice of nonprofit management better if we understand these basic concepts better, and if we how to do activities and what kind of things can help the nonprofit sector as a whole. Now, the other thing is if we explore more, and we should know how the nonprofit sector works similar to how we understand the government and the business. And then also philanthropy is an essential tool in our collection to solve public problems, because there's so many problems been left by the government and the market, or there are certain limitations force government and the market force out, right? Because they just can't solve the problem, or they need to work with philanthropy and the nonprofit sector together to solve the problem because of the scale and the nature of problem. For example, poverty alleviation, etc. Okay, and we'll focus on three different layers. The first layer is about the relationship between nonprofit and the government. Especially, we are going to talk about the third-party government, nonprofit failure, etc. And the second layer is the relationship between nonprofit and the business world. And especially, we are going to talk about the corporate social responsibility and the social enterprise. And the third layer is about the relationship between nonprofits and individuals, like donors, volunteers, etc. Okay, I hope you enjoy this short introduction. Thank you very much.